Please help, our mama is dying. He rushes after them, expecting a routine emergency. But everything changes when he finds a woman collapsed on the floor, barely breathing, gripping a police badge. His heart stops. He knows her. And when he looks into the children's desperate eyes, a buried past comes crashing back, forcing him to his knees. In tears, Dante Morales had spent years on the force in Ridgewater, a small town tucked between snow-covered hills. He was used to quiet shifts were the biggest. Excitement was a stray dog causing a traffic jam, but tonight, as the freezing wind howled through empty streets, his pulse pounded in his ears. The little boy's grip on his wrist was firm despite the tremor. In his tiny fingers, his sister, too cold to speak, as she clung to her brother's side. They led him to the deserted trailer park, where rusted cars and broken-down homes sat in eerie silence. The wind pushed against the thin walls, making them creak like they might collapse under the weight of the winter. The door to the trailer hung open, swaying, slightly revealing the dim interior. Dante hesitated, his gut twisting inside. The cold was just as biting as the air outside. The woman lay sprawled on the floor near a small kitchen table, her body too still, her dark hair tangled against her pale skin. The only sign of life was the faint rise and fall of her chest. Her fingers clutched a metal badge, its surface worn, familiar too. Familiar. His flashlight swept over her face, and recognition hit him like a punch to the gut. Elena, 15 years since he had walked away, leaving her behind, thinking it was for the best, but here she was barely breathing, her children gripping at his sleeves with fear in their eyes. Dante knelt beside her, pressing 2 fingers to her throat. Her pulse was weak, fluttering like a caged bird. The boy, Matto, dropped to his knees beside him. She was coughing. He choked out his voice, barely more than a whisper, really bad. Then she fell. His sister Camilla buried her face against his shoulder, silent but trembling. Dante grabbed his radio. Dispatch, I need an ambulance at 14th and Crestview. Adult female unconscious. Possible respiratory failure, 2 minors present. His voice was steady, but inside his chest was tight with something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. As he waited, he grabbed the nearest blanket from the worn couch and wrapped it around the children. Camilla shivered, but when Dante tried to pull her closer, she resisted, pressing herself into her brother's side. The trust wasn't there, yet maybe it never would be. The ambulance siren split the night. Air, red and blue lights flashing against the frost-covered ground. Paramedics rushed in there. Movement swift and efficient, checking Elena's vitals, securing oxygen. Matto and Camilla flinched at every sudden sound, their small hands gripping each other tightly. Dante reached out, steadying Matteo's shoulder. She's going to be okay. He had no idea if that was true, but the boy nodded, desperate to believe it. The paramedics lifted Elena onto the stretcher, her body limp, her face unrivaled even in the flashing lights. As they loaded her into the ambulance, Camilla finally spoke, her voice so small it nearly disappeared in the wind. They're going to take us away. Dante's got twisted. He knew how the system worked. No immediate family, no legal guardian. Child Protective Services would step in. He had seen too many kids vanish in the foster system, separated, forgotten. He looked at Matteo's thin arms wrapped protectively around his sister, at the sheer terror in his eyes, and something inside him cracked. No one is taking you anywhere, Dante said, his voice firm. Not if I can help it. At the hospital, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as doctors worked to stabilize. Elena, Matto, and Camilla sat in the waiting room, huddled together on a chair too big for them. Dante paced the way to the past, pressing heavy on his shoulders when the nurse approached, clipboard in hand. He already knew what she was going to say. Are you family? He hesitated. The truth was complicated. I'm a friend. The words felt hollow, inadequate. The nurse sighed, glancing at the children. We need to call child services. Monk had snapped up. Please, he whispered, his fingers gripping the edge of the chair. Let them take us. Dante exhaled slowly. Give me some time. He pulled out his phone and made a call. If anyone could find a loophole, it was Miguel Rivas, an old friend who now worked in family law. You want custody? Miguel sounded half awake. Dante, do you know what you're asking? They'll split them up, Miguel. They'll lose each other. I can't let that happen. There was a long silence. You'll need Elena's consent. Dante's eyes moved to the hospital bed behind the glass, where Elena lay unconscious. I'll get at the hours. Crawled by Camilla, eventually fell asleep, curled in the chair, her tiny fingers still gripping Matteo's sleeve. The rhythmic beep of monitors filled the sterile hospital room, the scent of antiseptic thick in the air. Matto stayed awake, his eyes never leaving his mother's room. Shadows stretched long against the walls of night, wearing on an agonizing slowness. When the first rays of sunlight touched the frost-covered windows, a quiet rasp broke the silence. Dante, he turned sharply. Elena's eyes were open, unfocused, but aware. A frail shadow of the strong woman he had once known. He moved to her bedside, his Throat tight, you scared us, she let out a weak laugh. But it turned into a cough, her body trembling from the effort. The kids, they're here safe. She closed her eyes, briefly relief washing over her pale features, then her gaze sharpened, locking onto him. Why are you here? Dante hesitated, the weight of their past pressing against his chest like an iron weight. Because they needed me, her eyes softened just a fraction, then her breath hitched, panic creeping into her. Expression CPS, I'm trying to stop. Them, Dante said quickly, his voice urgent. I need you to sign guardianship over to me. Elena flinched, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. You, after all these years. I know I don't deserve it. I know I don't deserve their trust. But I swear to you, I won't let them be taken. Not now, not ever. Silence stretched between them thick with the unspoken wounds of the past. Finally, Elena exhaled shakily. Matto and Camilla, they love each other too much to be separated. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the clipboard, her grip weak, but her resolve unwavering. As she scrolled her name, Dante released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He took the papers, gripping them like a lifeline. Thank you, Elena looked at him, something unreadable in her gaze. Don't make me regret it. Dante nodded, stepping back. As she closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her under again, he turned toward the waiting room, where Matto was now sitting up, his wary gaze locked onto him. Are we leaving? The boy's voice was tight with suspicion. Dante crouched down to his level, holding up the signed documents. Not just yet, but when we do, you're coming with me, Matteo's eyes widened, hope flickering through the fear. Then slowly, he nodded, his fingers tightening protectively around Camilla's small hand. Just then the door behind them burst open. A nurse rushed inside, panic stark in her eyes. Check coding. Dante spun around, his heart pounding. As the room erupted into chaos, alarms blared. Doctors stormed inside, shouting orders. Matto grabbed Camilla, pulling her into his arms. As they both watched in frozen horror, Dante was shoved back. As the medical team worked frantically, he clenched the papers in his hands, his breath coming in ragged gasps. No. The minutes stretched unbearably long, each second dragging against his chest like a knife. Then a flat line, the long, unbroken wail of the monitor filled the room. Time of death. Dante didn't hear the rest. The words blurred into the background, drowned by the sound of his own heartbeat hammering against his ribs. Matto let out a quiet, strangled sob, and Camilla, still half asleep, whimpered at the shift in the air. Dante gritted his teeth. He had sworn he wouldn't fail them. He had sworn he wouldn't walk away again. So he didn't. Instead, he stepped forward, placed a steady hand on Matteo's shoulder, and said the words that sealed their fate: we're going home.